Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Uh, just 1 minute left. We'll start in another 1 minute, sir.
We must wait.
So, good evening, sir, and good evening, everyone, for this 30-second edition of our Environmental and Occupational Health DigiConnect webinar, which is being held every week at 6:30 p.m. And this, we are maintaining a routine for last 32 weeks. And to our great honor, we are having one guest speaker, Dr. Vivek Nangia, who will deliberate on the topic influenza and COVID-19 viruses have no borders. And this is a very interesting topic. And Dr. Nangia will join he has joined already, but his session will be after Dr. Rajiv Jain's session on COVID updates. So before we start, let me request our President, Dr. Gajendra Kumar sir, to give the welcome address. Dr. Gajendra Kumar.
37 second issue of webinar of our association, and special welcome and our own speaker, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. They shall be presenting on COVID present situation, and Dr. Nangia shall be speaking on influenza and COVID. As the virus, this coronavirus is very erratically behaving. So I think the today's session is going to be very interesting. With these few words, I once again welcome you all. And I hand over to Dr. Sandeep Sharma to proceed ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Gajendra Kumar sir. Dr. Nangia sir, for your information, this is the forum of our industrial physicians, occupational physicians, and public health physicians across India. And we are from Indian Association of Occupational Health, and we have been joined from across India, and gradually people will be joining. And this has been our routine to start with the latest updates of the COVID pandemic across India and across the globe. And that will be addressed by our Senior Vice President, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. So Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir, may I request you to share your screen and start your presentation?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sharma, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So, dear friends, we as occupational health physicians have to be always up to date about knowledge about epidemiological position. And I believe COVID-19 is an occupational disease. It is not only an infectious disease. So epidemiology and COVID-19 go hand in hand. I would like to today present three aspects of COVID-19. One is the situation in USA and Europe. Second is we will analyze the MyStory event where we in India have touched 80 lakh cases during this week. So we will try to analyze what has happened and how epidemiologically this is important. So we start with, as usual, with the WHO coronavirus disease COVID-19 dashboard of World Health Organization, taken today about 1 hour back. So what do you see today? You see now a very changed world. In what way? Let us examine. If you look at cases newly reported in the last 24 hours, United States reported 89,000 out of 5,15,636 cases. This is also important that for the first time, world is reporting far more than 5 lakh cases in 24 hours. But USA has again gone on an upsurge, and we will analyze USA's position later. India reported 48,000, but most important is France, Italy, Spain, and UK. Look at France. It reported 47,000 cases and a lockdown has been declared. Italy reported 26,800 cases. Spain reported 23,580 cases, and United Kingdom reported 23,065 cases in last 24 hours. This is really a situation which is the repeat of what happened in Europe and USA in the months of January, February, March, when lockdown was declared in India. Cumulative cases, if we see, total 4,51 lakh cases have been reported in the world, out of which 88 lakh 52,000.
Your voice is breaking, Dr. Rajiv, sir.
Is it okay now?
There is some disturbances there.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. So all over the world, 4,51 lakh cases, and USA has reported 88 lakh, but India is not far behind. India has reported 81 lakh cases. About this event of India crossing 80 lakh cases, cumulatively, we will analyze later in the presentation. France again has come back, and Brazil 54 lakh cases, and France 12 lakh cases, and Spain again 11 lakh 60,000 cases. These are countries which have reported more than 10 lakh cases. But not far behind is UK. It has already reported 9 lakh 65,000 cases. And remember, it is reporting every day 23,000 cases, and it shall report more in the days to come, because they are now preparing for another partial lockdown across the country in UK. So what we can say with certainty, there is a second resurgence in Europe, and there is a third resurgence in USA. And it is evolving faster than we think in India. Because India, we are facing the downward slide of the first wave of infection. We have not yet seen the total downward position of first wave, let alone second and third, which Europe and USA are facing today. Now, a look at the global position of deaths. If you look at deaths newly reported in the last 24 hours, 6,900 deaths have been reported, out of which more than 1,000 have been reported from USA. And this is the third consecutive day when USA has reported more than 1,000 deaths every day. And on the other hand, India has started reporting less and less number of cases. In fact, for the first time, India reported less than 600 deaths in a day, 551. But Brazil still continues to report more than 500, 513. And France, 235, Italy, 217, Spain, 173, and UK, 280. If you combine these four countries, I'm not talking of Germany, Belgium, or other countries of Europe. I'm only talking of four countries, that is UK, Spain, Italy, and France. They have reported cumulatively more than 1,000 deaths. So deaths also are occurring in a big number, as occurring in USA, about more than 1,000 a day. Now look at deaths cumulative. Out of 11 lakh deaths, 2,27,000 deaths have been from USA, 1,58,000 from Brazil, and India being third position at 1,21,000 deaths. If you look at UK, Spain, Italy, and France, they have reported 35,700, 38,122 Italy, 35,000 Spain, and UK more than 45,000. So this is also much larger than combined. If you look at it, they have reported more than deaths reported by India. So Europe and USA are the epicenters of current infection in the world. Next slide, please. This is USA. This is the graph of USA from 1st March on the left bottom to October 29. So what you see, daily cases and 7-day average. Daily cases in orange and 7-day average in black. So we can say new COVID-19 cases in USA have broke its single-day record for new coronavirus infections on Thursday, reporting 91,530 new cases according to data collected by worldometers.info. The previous single-day record of 81,585 new cases was set just a day previously on Wednesday. Fact underlying the strength of the third wave in the country. On average, the country has reported 77,734 cases every day in the past week, surpassing the peak of 69,978 seen during the second wave at the end of July. Next slide, please. Across the country, what is happening in USA? Just look at it. It shows there are peaks everywhere. This is quite widespread in USA. The first wave, you remember, was in the East Coast. Now, you are seeing the third wave across USA. Daily cases are at peak levels and are rising in 24 states in the country, while 7 other states are currently at 90% of their peak. So 31 states are deeply affected. The map shows which states have cases currently at peak levels. In order to identify those states, we looked at the 7-day trailing average of new infection and compared it to its previous peak. As a direct consequence, the load on hospitals is increasing as well. According to a tally maintained by Reuters, that is the news agency, the number of daily hospitalization is at the highest level ever in 21 states across United States of America. It's deep, widespread infection today, increased cases of hospitalization. Let us see how it goes up. And over that, they are going to vote. The elections are in the final phases in USA, across USA. Next slide, please. This is the death starting to reach 1,000 mark in USA. If you look at the graph, daily deaths in blue and 7-day average in black. So what do you see? 1,047 new COVID-19 deaths in the USA on Thursday. The third day in a row, it crossed the 1,000 mark. More than 1,000 people died of the virus on Thursday, marking the third time in as many days that the milestone has been passed. Although average daily deaths are still below the highest levels ever recorded in the country, that is 827 in last week, against a peak of 1,178 for week ending August 4. It is rising alarmingly fast again. The added load on hospitals across the country has revived memories of the devastating first wave of the virus in March, April, and May, with people on ventilators dying alone in hospital isolation wards and medical staff coping physical and mental exhaustion. Next, please. Yes. Global new cases have crossed 5 lakh mark for the first time. As you saw, 5,45,936 new cases reported in the world on Thursday, the highest ever. The daily cases are in orange and black is 7-day average. For the first time ever, over 500,000 cases were reported in a single day across the world on Wednesday. While the American surge was the biggest contributor to this tally, cases in many countries in Europe, as you saw, are also at an all-time high. Case trajectories, 7-day average of new cases are rising in 9 of the 10 most affected countries. India is the only exception right now where cases are going down. To be sure, despite the downward trend, India remains the country reporting third highest average daily cases what is in the last week. Only the US and France are reporting more cases.
There's some technical problem with Dr. Rajiv. Dr. Gajen sir. Dr. Rajiv sir, you are not audible.
Wait for some time if you can set it right.
So what we can do, sir, we can have his presentation after Dr. Nangia's deliberations.
Yes, we can.
That will be a better option. Dr. Rajiv sir, you're not audible. You are mute. Your video is, we can see, but anyway. So, Dr. Nangia, I hope you are, Dr. Nangia, sir. Dr. Nangia has joined, and Dr. Nangia, sir, you are most welcome to this COVID EPID update and our DigiConnect webinar 32nd issue. And the topic today is influenza and COVID-19 viruses have no borders. So this will be a great topic, and for the participants, let me introduce Dr. Vivek Nangia. Dr. Vivek Nangia is Principal Director and Head Institute of Respiratory and Clinical Care and Sleep Medicine, Max Hospital, Saket, New Delhi, and he is also the Chief of the Pulmonology Services for Max Healthcare India Cluster 1. So Dr. Nangia would be the best person, as Dr. Rajiv was telling, that so many cases are there which are having first wave, second wave, now the third wave is coming in US, and there are a lot of hospitalization, and main deaths are due to the pulmonary affections, and this virus is affecting the lungs especially, and that is the main reason of the deaths. And if they are not managed at the right time and not managed properly, then the fatalities due to this COVID-19 will be definitely there.
Hello, Dr. Sharma.
Sir, yes, sir. You are joined, sir. So let me introduce Dr. Nangia, sir. Dr. Vivek Nangia is an internationally renowned interventional pulmonologist.
There are still glitches with Dr. R.K. Jain. So it is better let us invite Dr. Nangia to.
Yeah.
I'm there now. Could we continue?
Sir, can you complete in another 10 minutes if possible, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Because we have to start by, before 7 o'clock, we have to start with Dr. Nangia.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you continue, sir.
So next slide, please. This is why the European countries are imposing lockdown too. As I told you, several of them are witnessing massive resurgence in like France, Italy. That is clearly shown in this graph. Next slide, please. This is showing rising across many European countries, cases rate per million, and rising in Israel. And India, if you see, level 62 at the bottom. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. COVID death rate per million. This is the graph. No, previous slide, please. Previous slide. Previous slide. Yes, this is the one. COVID death rate per million. Next. Despite major resurgence in infection cases, the death rates are relatively stable in Western Europe. So this wave is not seeing many high death rates, but death rates are rising in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Israel. That is the observation of this slide. Next, please. This is the COVID-19 snapshot, 81 lakh cases, 1,21,000 deaths, 108.8 million tests, 8 lakh active cases, 48,170 new cases, 550 deaths yesterday, 10.7 lakh tests yesterday, and 7-day average test positive rate of 4.35. Cases growth has decelerated to 0.8%. Next slide, please. This is the graph we showed how things have to be seen in perspective in states in India. Micro-analysis of Indian data. Kerala is reporting highest confirmed cases last 24 hours, 6,638. Maharashtra, 6,190. Delhi, 5,891. West Bengal, 3,979. Karnataka, 3,589. So these are the 5 states, epicenter today. Kerala, Maharashtra, Delhi, West Bengal, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh are the 5 most. But deaths, if you look at deaths, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, and Delhi are reporting highest number of deaths. Tests per million, if you see, Delhi, Pondicherry, Jammu Kashmir, Andhra, Karnataka, and Kerala are reporting highest number of deaths. But if you look at Maharashtra, it is yet not reporting highest number of deaths per million. That is, Maharashtra is reporting 572. Indian average is 788. If you look at the growth, daily growth, 7-day average growth, daily growth, it is Mizoram, Kerala, Delhi, Manipur, West Bengal. They are reporting the highest number of daily growth. Mizoram 1.9, Kerala 1.7, Delhi 1.3, Manipur 1.2, West Bengal 1.1, and Himachal 1.1, while Indian average is 0.6. These states are double of what Indian average is. Next slide, please. This is India crossed 8 million reported cases. And if you look at this graph, you can see confirmed cases in blue, active cases in orange, recovered cases in green, and deaths cases in orange, dark orange, and daily cases in purple color. So what you see is in one slide, the entire evolution of Indian infection. So clearly there is first wave and going down. Next slide, please. This is in one slide, daily cases, daily active cases, daily deaths, and daily tests across India from February 1 to yesterday. What do you see? 7-day average daily growth is falling for the last now 43 days. Daily active cases are still in territory is 6 lakh. Tests have declined recently. Daily tests are average is 11.3 lakh, and daily deaths are 559. Next slide, please. This is growth of tests, which is slightly above that of cases now. Test positivity rate, as you saw, 4.2%, and has been less than 5% level for 9 days in a row. Only 9.49%, that is of the 10.7 crore tests so far, are RT-PCR. That is 46.2% test. And most states do not report test results by type of test. So it's difficult at times. But next slide, please. This shows a considerable variation in the aggregate daily testing reported by all the states together, and that by ICMR. This variation, however, has been evened out for now. So this is good. Next slide, please. This is showing the mortality rate from COVID-19 across Indian states and UTs. So Maharashtra, Gujarat, Punjab, Delhi, and West Bengal are having highest mortality rate in the country. Next slide, please. These are the trends in mortality rates for both closed cases, that is recovered in deaths, and total cases. What you see is high variation in these rates in most of the states, and mortality rate is going up in several states. That is Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Manipur, and Arunachal Pradesh. So you see the reverse trend in these few states. There is no consistency across India. Next slide, please. These are the trends in daily new cases across states. If you look at gray is the daily new cases and red one is 7-day moving average. Delhi is reporting the highest daily numbers recently, and Haryana is seeing new increased number of cases recently. So we have to be on guard in Delhi and Haryana. Next slide, please. This is difference in daily case growth and test positivity rate, both 7-day averages across states in India. If you look at it, Kerala and Mizoram, Kerala in the south, Mizoram in the northeast, having the highest growth in daily new cases. Next slide, please. This is the trends in daily tests per million per day and test positivity rate across states with at least 30,000 reported cases. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Kerala, Delhi, Odisha, Telangana state, Assam, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab, Jharkhand, Jammu Kashmir, Uttar Pradesh, and Pondicherry and Telangana are all decreasing their daily tests on average in recent time, which is not good. They must maintain or increase the number of tests. Number of states are decreasing the number of tests, which is not right. Next, please. Next slide, please. So on today is 31st of October. Today is Maharshi Valmiki's birthday. So happy Valmiki Jayanti. Next slide, please. Today is also National Unity Day, Rashtriya Ekta Divas. So greetings for the National Unity Day 2020. Next slide, please. Today is also World Cities Day. By UN Habitat, United Nations celebrates 31st October as World Cities Day. Better city, better life. Valuing our communities and cities. And in the context of COVID-19, it calls for strengthening our cities. How do we strengthen our cities? By the quality of our living spaces, quality and access of transport, quality of air, water, and food, and our access to healthcare services. And last but not the least, our access to sanitation and hygiene needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv, sir. So for giving the overview of the COVID-19 pandemic for last so many months, 7-8 months now, we are in this COVID pandemic, and still the situation is not under control, and the countries which were showing decrease in number, now again they are showing rise in numbers, and there are second waves, third waves, and in India also now we are seeing a decrease in the number of cases, but this should not be a misnomer, and seeing the less number of cases, we should not be complacent about our attitude, our behavior, because this will again lead to the second wave, and the treatment facilities and the healthcare facilities which are available in India right now, they are there to cater all the needs which are evolving. But later, if the numbers are very high, then it will be difficult for us all to manage the show. And today, that is for the reason why we have invited Dr. Nangia, sir, Dr. Vivek Nangia, to enlighten us regarding various type of flus, influenza, and COVID, especially COVID viruses, how to distinguish between them, what is the role of vaccination, how it affects, because if we are wise about the pathology and the pathogenesis of this particular virus, then it will be easy for every one of us to follow a protocol and take the preventive and precautionary measures. So Dr. Vivek Nangia is an internationally renowned interventional pulmonologist with over 2 decades of rich clinical experience. He is amongst the pioneers to conduct various bronchoscopic intervention and medical thoracoscopy in Delhi. And he has a stellar professional background and has undergone extensive training in various fields of pulmonary and critical care medicine. And he is one of the few qualified infectious disease specialists in the entire country, having successfully completed first a diploma and then MSc in infectious disease from London. He has been honored with various prestigious recognitions, including the fellowships by Infectious Disease Society of America, American College of Chest Physicians, National College of Chest Physicians, India, and Indian College of Critical Care Medicine. He is a revered teacher and has many publications in peer-reviewed journals and textbooks, and he has been instrumental in setting up and managing an 11-bedded state-of-art medical ICU, and a fully equipped bronchoscopy unit suite at Fortis Flight Lieutenant Rajan Dhal Hospital, Vasant Kunj. And he was successfully running a postgraduate program for DNB students and is himself adept at performing various procedures like bronchoscopy, transbronchial biopsies, EBUS, medical thoracoscopies, endobronchial laser, and stenting, etc. So, Dr. Vivek Nangia, sir, the floor is yours. And again, to introduce our participants, we are all from different industries, and we are from Indian Association of Occupational Health, and Association of Environmental and Occupational Health is the Delhi branch of IAOH. And we have been joined from across India from different industries, and we would be glad enough to learn from you, sir, because you have been a pioneer in this particular field, and it is better to learn from our own people. And Dr. Nangia, sir, you can share your screen and start your presentation, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep, for those kind words. It's really an honor for me to be on this platform here. This is the first time I'm joining you all, but it seems to be a very knowledgeable and very elite kind of a group that you people have actually created. It's nice to see Dr. Gajendra, Dr. Rajiv Kumar telling us in so much of details about the COVID pandemic, the current status. I mean, these are figures that even I wasn't aware really that we are. The only thing, yeah, as you also said that, you know, this is not the time that we should actually become complacent, even if we think that the numbers are coming down, but actually in real practice, they are not. These numbers are only rising and rising and rising further. There may be days in between where there may be lesser number coming, but it doesn't matter because COVID is here to stay and we need to learn to live with it. And influenza is one other disease which can actually make situation very complex now as the winters are approaching. Influenza virus has been existing in our society for a very long time. It's not only the COVID, but influenza also takes a huge toll. You know, I remember the 2009 pandemic of influenza, H1N1 influenza that we had in our country. That time I just recently joined Fortis Hospital and we used to be flooded with patients. Now, when I was talking about, and that was the first time when we were introduced to this N95 mask and PPE kits. And I remember initially we did lose quite a few patients also because the pandemic had come out of the blue. People were not prepared. But yes, we did a good job in handling them and managing them subsequently. Sorry. So what we don't realize is that the flu, if it remains common cold, cough, then it doesn't really matter. But then if it becomes a disease which requires to be hospitalized, then the costs of managing even a simple cold can really go up significantly. The annualized cost of flu pandemics is approaching the cost of climate change almost. Climate change costs about $890 billion. And if you see here, then the costs including mortality are $570 billion and direct costs are nothing less than $80 billion. Influenza by definition usually starts with a common cold. It's an acute, febrile, highly contagious respiratory infection characterized by sudden onset of fever and myalgia, which can cause hospitalization and even death. It starts with a common cold, nasal symptoms, respiratory symptoms, extending into the lungs, resulting in ARDS and other complications, and finally death. As per WHO, every year 5 to 15% of the population are affected with influenza. Influenza leads to 3 to 5 million cases of severe illness, and it also leads to about 290,000 to 650,000 deaths every year. That's a huge number. I mean, imagine Dr. Rajiv was just sharing the figures with us, and with COVID, we haven't reached as many deaths yet. And yet we are so fearful of it. But H1N1 and influenza, we just take it lightly sometimes. The influenza virus was first illustrated in 1933. It basically has these two spikes, the hemagglutinin spike. Hello? Yeah, am I audible? And neuraminidase spike. Yes. These are the two spikes that it has on its surface. And depending on the changes in these spikes, it can either undergo an antigenic shift or an antigenic drift. And this is seen predominantly in type A influenza. And type B is the one which undergoes only antigenic drifts. So when it is a drift, that means it's only a minor change in its antigenic structure. Whereas when we say shift, then it's actually a major change. This virus belongs to the influenza virus family or the Orthomyxoviridae family. There's a type A, type B, and a type C. Type C is usually stable and we don't worry about it really. It only causes sporadic kind of cases. It's type A and type B which cause significant illness and epidemics. Type A mutates easily. There are 18 influenza A types, subtypes, and 11 NA subtypes are known to exist. So NA means hemagglutinin and NA means neuraminidase types. So basically you have H and you have N, and then if it is H1, N1, that's one type, H2, N3, N35. Similarly, there can be various types that can exist in the society. There are 18 hemagglutinin subtypes and 11 neuraminidase subtypes, and the combination of these two spikes can result in various subtypes and various combinations. H1N1 was the one which caused Spanish flu in 1918 and then the swine flu in 2009. H3N2 caused the Hong Kong flu in 1968. And then we have the type B, which can be further broken down into lineages and strains, for example, Yamagata and Victoria. Mutations at a much lower rate than the influenza virus A are seen with type B. These are also the seasonal ones, type A and type B, and they occur predominantly in the winter months in temperate climates. But in India now, we see it across the year. At least two spikes happen in India now. One is during the winter season, and the other is during the monsoons. Pandemics are basically large outbreaks that occur outside the influenza season and result in 5 to 10 times more hospitalizations than ever. This is also a droplet infection, just like COVID-19 is. It is basically spread by coughing, laughing, sneezing, and then direct contact. And biting and destruction, it results in biting and destruction of the epithelial cells from nasopharynx to the alveoli, which then results in a local inflammatory reaction in the upper respiratory tract, subsequently spreading to the systemic body reaction like fever, muscular pains, myalgia, body aches. And then finally, it's the immune response, which is there to tackle the virus. And if it doesn't get tackled at that level, then it can result in sepsis, septic shock, deaths, and other systemic complications like headache, joint pains. There could be gastritis, which we call as the stomach flu. And the time from infection to illness, that is the incubation period, is about 2 days. Again, very similar to COVID. The influenza virus infects the respiratory tract, and so does COVID, and cough can be severe and can last for 2 or more weeks. It usually affects 20 to 30% of the children and about 5 to 10% of the adults. The highly prone, susceptible population is children younger than 5 years, adults more than 65 years, pregnant women, immunocompromised people, people with chronic underlying medical conditions like chronic heart, lung, kidney disease, liver disease, blood or metabolic disease, and healthcare workers, that is you and us, at all times. We are all the time prone, we are all the time being exposed to people carrying different types of infections, especially influenza, where the infectivity rate is very, very high. The lab diagnosis of influenza can sometimes be difficult. In fact, it used to be difficult at one. Now we have the RT-PCR that is easily available to us, multiplex chain RT-PCR tests. You get the test done, and usually in 1 to 6 hours, the report should be available. There's also a rapid influenza diagnostic test that we don't use so commonly. Usually what they take is a nasopharyngeal swab or a throat swab. Nasal wash and nasal aspirate are taken more in children rather than adults. Viral cell culture, rapid cell culture, immunofluorescence are other techniques which are not used as often in our day-to-day practice. So RT-PCR is the one that is used very often. And in fact, now we've started testing all our patients who are coming in with symptoms of flu-like symptoms for H1N1 as well as for COVID. So as far as the treatment modalities are concerned, there are 2 treatment options. One is the symptomatic medication that is given to the patient, like decongestants, cough medicines, pain relievers. And then there are the antivirals. The antivirals can basically be classified into 4 drugs. One is the oseltamivir, the zanamivir, amantadine, and rimantadine, out of which oseltamivir is the predominant drug that is used for control. There is also peramivir, but that is only available in selected countries. But please remember, this antiviral drug has to be started within the first 48 hours. So oseltamivir has to be started within the first 48 hours. And then again, please remember, with the addition, with the use of oseltamivir, it is not that there have been any changes in the outcome in terms of mortality, but there have only been changes as far as the recovery of the symptoms is concerned. It only helps recover faster by 2 or 3 days, whether you use oseltamivir or you don't use. Influenza viruses may develop resistance to these antiviral drugs, and they may lead to rebound symptoms as well, resulting in re-emergence of symptoms with increased severity. There is the link that exists between flu and other diseases is that in diabetic patients, it is 3 times more common. In cardiac patients, it is 6 times more common. In cardiovascular disease patients, like the stroke patients, it is 3 times more common. In COPD, about 30%, and about 5 to 27% of all acute respiratory infections is because of the influenza virus. So with immunization, this can be brought down from anything between 24% in the cardiovascular diseases to up till 79% in diabetic patients and 76% in COPD patients. So there's a significant reduction in flu with the use of the vaccination in this, especially in the high-risk group of patients. It can reduce the healthcare costs, the overall hospitalizations, as well as the claims. So what is the link between influenza and COVID-19? WHO very categorically states that the most effective way to prevent influenza or severe outcomes from influenza is vaccination. Safe and effective vaccines are available and have been used for more than 60 years. My personal belief also is that if something can be prevented, then it should be prevented. After all, we've known it from centuries that prevention is always better than cure. The 10 most affected countries, of course, this is slightly outdated and Dr. Rajiv has already shared all this with you, so I'll skip this portion. What is important is that there are numerous overlapping features between influenza and COVID-19. When the patient comes to you with cough, cold, sore throat, fever, body ache, it's very difficult to differentiate between the two, except for performing the test. But if you see that influenza and COVID-19 both occur in the extremes of ages, in obese patients, they are more likely, these are the at-risk. Those people who have a chronic lung disease, cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, immunosuppressed, staying in nursing homes, they're always more prone to influenza. Similarly, for COVID-19, almost the same group of patients, including males, hypertension, and surgery during the incubation period. They all increase the risk of COVID-19 infection. If you look at the complications, so what I'm trying to show you here is that the cycle followed by influenza and COVID-19 is almost similar. The complications are similar: pneumonia, respiratory failure, ARDS, cardiac injury, multi-organ failure, worsening of the underlying chronic medical conditions, inflammation of the heart. So we get patients with myocarditis, pericarditis, brain involvement, muscle tissue involvement. The only difference that we're seeing for the first time is that there is one virus which is also resulting in embolic phenomena. It's a prothrombotic kind of a state where people are coming in with DVTs, people are developing pulmonary embolism, people are developing strokes, so on and so forth. In children, it is known to cause this multi-system inflammatory syndrome, about which we don't know much yet, and nor do we have any specific treatment for it yet. Therefore, when diagnosing SARS-CoV-2 subjects, the possibility of co-infection must be considered. As I said, we've started sending H1N1 samples also now in all our COVID patients. 3% of the patients hospitalized with COVID-19 were also co-infected with another respiratory virus like influenza A and B, together were the most prevalent viruses. From available data, one is unable to draw conclusions as to whether patients who have concurrent viral infections have a worse prognosis than those in whom SARS-CoV-2 is only detected pathogen. But I would presume so because coexistence of another virus or another pathogen is definitely going to cause a compounded situation where the immune response would be difficult to elicit and control both the infections simultaneously. Even if you see the US mortality death certificates listing, pneumonia, influenza, and COVID, definitely it is as compared to 2018, 2019, 2020, the numbers are only going up this year. So even the Director General of WHO has categorically said that co-circulation of COVID-19 and influenza can worsen the impact on healthcare systems that are already overwhelmed with the patients. Co-infection of COVID and flu underdetected but exists. This is what has been said. There are only 4 case reports, but study with percentage of co-infections. There are about 6 such studies which have been published. But I'm sure now that we're approaching the winter season, this number is only going to go up and create a havoc for us. So before COVID, 62% of the employers didn't have a plan to tackle the disease outbreak. How prepared are we today? Are we really prepared still? Or do we want another epidemic to come or another pandemic to come? The next devastating yet unnamed outbreak is not so much of a matter of if, but when. We tackle with one, and another one is waiting for us. So what does holistic well-being mean to all of us? Do we consider pandemic preparedness as a part of holistic well-being? Do we consider all aspects of prevention? Or are we utilizing what we already have? That is a prophylaxis that is available to us. Let me reiterate once more that there can be a significant number of flu-related hospitalization, which is one of the leading cause of insurance claims. It's 3 times higher in diabetic patients, 6 times higher in patients with cardiovascular diseases, 3 times higher in those with stroke. 3 times higher risk of stroke in cardiovascular diseases, and about 27% of all acute respiratory infections are because of viral. And 30% of case fatality in COVID, in COPD is all because of viral infection. So flu vaccination can help in reducing flu-related risk of hospitalization by average of 41% in the adults. Respiratory illness, as I've already stated, carries a huge burden amongst the communicable diseases. Pneumonia and acute respiratory infection forms the major chunk of communicable diseases. And of course, it's the major contributor of insurance claims. It's predominantly in the age group of 25 to 55 years of age group. On an average, every infectious disease costs a huge burden on the Indian economy as well. It's almost to the tune of 23,000 plus, I would say. If you were to go to a corporate hospital, the charges would be still higher. But still, there are certain barriers that we need to overcome. I think out of all these barriers that have been mentioned here, the biggest is conviction in your own self. You have to be convinced yourself first that yes, this virus is likely, this vaccine is likely to help. Only then would you ever consider using it. You think of cost, you think of convenience of the vaccination clinics, fear of vaccine adverse effects. But believe me, if you're convinced yourself that this vaccine is most likely going to work and prevent, today I will tell you that if there was a COVID vaccine likely to come in tomorrow, even if it was to have an efficacy of 30%, 40%, yet and a huge phenomenal cost, everybody would jump for it. But for influenza virus, for which there's already an existing vaccine, and we know that influenza pandemic can also happen at any time and can be equally dangerous, but still we would not use it because we think, oh, influenza is like a common cold and can get away with it. But once the pandemic starts, then one, the vaccine may not be available, the vaccine may be black marketed, and other problems may start coming up then. So might as well, important is to vaccinate in time for whatever vaccinations we can. In fact, why only influenza, even other vaccines can be considered when you're considering it. Believe that vaccination can cause influenza per se. So these are all barriers. And I'm sure I'll be happy to discuss all these barriers if you want me to. That these are all non-existent mental barriers more than anything else. One thing we know for sure is that influenza reduces productivity in several ways. One, of course, is absenteeism. Absent employees reduce the productivity of other workers as well, because other people start thinking, why should I work if this person is on leave? Then presenteeism. It's a reduced employee performance. If you have somebody with cold and cough all the time, heavy head all the time, they obviously cannot perform as well. Then, of course, increased medical costs, replacement costs, disruption of office continuity and communications, and an extended recovery period due to serious complications. Internal and external transmission reduces morale as well as the reputation of the organization. So, influenza is considered to be highly disruptive, especially for adults who are working. Patients may have symptoms up to 11 to even 14 days. In fact, even these patients should actually be isolated and kept in seclusion so that it doesn't spread any further. We've lost our fear because we think that we already have antibodies towards it. But please let me tell you, these antibodies only last for a short period and do not last lifelong. The average number of work days lost per influenza illness is about 1 to 6 days. So from physician diagnosed influenza, the mean working day lost or episode of influenza infection is between 3.7 to 6. And from laboratory confirmed influenza is about 1.5 to 5 times. So workplace is typically an ideal location for influenza vaccination. Workplace vaccination programs provide increased influenza vaccine compliance, easier access to vaccination, reduced costs, time, and inconvenience. They're all there in the office at the same time. Well, that is what we do in our hospital. We ask all the employees to come to our vaccine clinic and take their vaccine shot. Influenza vaccine is a mandatory vaccine that all of them must be provided, especially those who are working in the ER and those who are working in the ICUs. It's mandatory for them to take the influenza vaccine every year. And of course, that will contribute to a positive environment. While influenza vaccine is considered to be the best approach, hand washing, healthy lifestyles, smoking cessation are other things that one should look at. Annual vaccination is the best way to prevent influenza, and it benefits the individual, the workplace, and even the family. As you can see in this picture, the herd immunity. So if there are a few people who got vaccinated, the virus would still spread. But if most people get vaccinated, then you'll be able to control the spread of this virus significantly. It has been recommended by the Indian Occupational Health Authority, 3% reduction in the absence rate, 30% improvement in the lost working days. There's a significant cost-benefit ratio for the influenza vaccine program, which is 4.2. That is a return of 4 euros at the cost of 1 euro due to the curtailed absenteeism. There is also a reduction in comorbidities. There's a reduction in absenteeism, reduction in the risk of heart attack by 19 to 45%, reduction in hospitalization by 54% in patients with diabetes. And of course, the health insurance benefits are also there because there's a reduction in hospitalization, insurance claims, and physician visits. Therefore, IAOH recommends influenza vaccination to everyone 19 years and above with a quadrivalent vaccine. So what are the immunization guidelines during the COVID pandemic? The Ministry of Health for Family Welfare says that both COVID-19 and seasonal influenza present as ILI, that is the influenza-like illness, or SARI, that is severe acute respiratory illness. And hence, cases in areas reporting COVID-19 must be evaluated and tested for both COVID-19 as well as seasonal influenza. Co-infections have been described by a number of studies. Most prominent among them are the RSV, enterovirus, and influenza A virus. With the approaching winter season, the seasonal influenza cases may show an upward trend, and there could be cases of co-infection with COVID-19. COVID-19 and influenza share many pathogenic features, as I've just explained, and whenever suspected, especially in areas reporting seasonal influenza cases, samples should also be sent and tested for both. The clinical features are overlapping. In addition to COVID management, for the treatment of influenza, oseltamivir needs to be administered in the prescribed dosages. Vaccination for seasonal influenza for healthcare workers and other high-risk groups must be implemented aggressively. WHO also has a similar opinion that wherever feasible, influenza vaccine of healthcare workers, older adults, pregnant women is advised. So basically the high risk group must take it. The highest priority are the healthcare workers, older adults, pregnant females, people with underlying health condition, as I stated, like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, lung disease, asthma, COPD, and of course, children would also benefit from it. These are also recommended by so many other societies, the European societies, the American Heart Association, the American College of Cardiology, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. And as I said, prevention is always better than cure. So we should prevent whatever can be prevented. Little is known about how SARS-CoV-2 and influenza viruses may influence or impact each other. But vaccination can help influenza at least in coming under control. It reduces the burden on healthcare systems, prevents influenza, will reduce the number of patients seeking healthcare and allow to focus on COVID-19 management. It reduces the spread of the influenza in the community and reduces the need to visit healthcare settings due to influenza. So again, when you go to a hospital, there's a greater chance of you acquiring a COVID infection because hospitals, medical centers, clinics have now become hotspots for COVID. So the best is to avoid going to these places, and that would only be possible if you're able to control your other diseases and prevent yourself from catching cold and cough and your employees as well. So to summarize, influenza vaccines are efficacious in reducing severe influenza diseases, including hospitalization. And there are 3 key reasons to vaccinate all people. One is to prevent the influenza. Second is to reduce the burden on the healthcare system. And third is to reduce the risk of catching influenza, which will reduce the risk of contaminating family members and others who may be at a higher risk of complication of influenza or COVID-19. Also, please remember that if there is somebody who's suffering from influenza, then his respiratory tract immunity would be low. The entire respiratory tract passage would be raw. There would be an inflammatory cascade already triggered off in the respiratory tract system. So he would be more susceptible to catch COVID infection from the others. Therefore, it is very important, like we say, that when there is COVID-19 pandemic going on, we've been saying right from day one that all comorbidities should be kept under control, like diabetes, hypertension. Take your medicines properly, heart disease, do not ignore it. If you have asthma, take your inhalers regularly, because all these are high risk factors. Similarly, now with the influenza season coming up and the new influenza vaccine being in place, it is very important to vaccinate everyone, especially the high risk group. CDC has approved it for anybody and everybody above 6 months of age should be getting a vaccination, especially the high risk group with the influenza. Of course, we know that vaccines do not save lives, but vaccinations do. Thank you so much for a patient hearing, and thank you so much for inviting me to this prestigious platform. It's really been an honor for me to speak before you all today.
Thank you, Dr. Nangia. Sir, definitely influenza vaccination is very important, and influenza as per se during this COVID pandemic is very important right now to every one of us, because influenza and COVID and H1N1, they are all coexisting, and it is very difficult to differentiate between all of them in the initial stages. And the influenza definitely, as you rightly said, that it increases the susceptibility of a person, especially with comorbid conditions, to get COVID infection. And you rightly said, sir, that there are no major differences between COVID-19 and influenza, except this thromboembolic phenomenon. And another point of difference between COVID-19 and this influenza is the transmissibility, because this R0 of this COVID-19 is very high. It is more than 2. And so it has got a very rapidly transmitted, it is a very rapidly transmitted disease. And definitely influenza and COVID, if they are coexisting, so what would be your suggestion how to differentiate between both of them in initial stages, so that especially the COVID patient, they can be given appropriate treatment? And What is your advice regarding this?
Initially, we thought, that initially when this COVID epidemic came,
Yeah.
that time we always thought that patients with cold, cough, sore throat are not the patients who would be presenting with COVID. They were thought to be typically of a viral illness like influenza. And COVID patients were presenting with predominantly fever, chest pain, body aches, loose motions, loss of smell, loss of taste. These were the classical symptoms that the patients with COVID were presenting. But now, in the last couple of weeks, I'm seeing patients with a sore throat, with fever, turning out to be COVID positive. Patients with nasal congestion, loss of smell, turning out to be H1N1 positive and COVID negative. So there's a total overlap and a total confusion now that what is COVID, what is H1N1, we don't know yet.
So, but it is still better during this sinus stage of the virus or the throat stage of the virus that it is easy to control this virus, especially COVID and influenza, both of them, and we should not.
In fact, there is an article in JAPI also that if there is a strong suspicion that this could be H1N1, sorry, this could be COVID, then you're justified to start the treatment empirically rather than waiting for the results to come. Because since COVID, H1N1, influenza, herpes zoster, in all these viral illnesses, it is important to start the treatment within the first 48 hours, as early as possible and not delay it. So it's the same principle that is applied to all these viral illnesses. The earlier you start, the better the outcome would be.
So it means we should get ourselves tested as early as possible if we are suspecting exposure. So from Indian Association of Occupational Health, sir, as you rightly said, we have issued a guidebook on adult immunization in occupational health settings, and considering, yes, it reduces the productivity and affects the health budget of our organization, any organization. So health worker, key to productivity and sustainability was the theme for this this manual, which was released during our annual conference in Mumbai. So now, sir, I would just like to ask one question from you. Like healthcare workers, they are more exposed to the viral loads because they are treating the patients. And so what is the vaccine coverage for the influenza vaccination in India, especially for the healthcare workers?
So, I may not have the exact figures, but I presume that it's less than 5% across the healthcare workers, unfortunately, which is quite abysmal. This is the data that was analyzed between 2006 and 2015, that the overall healthcare worker coverage with influenza vaccine was less than 5%.
Okay.
So there's a huge scope there.
So more and more of healthcare workers, they should be at least immunized for this.
They are the ones who are actually more exposed. Now we've started using masks, but earlier when you were not using masks, you were always being exposed to viral infections all the time.
So another question is, sir, is there any benefit of influenza vaccination on COVID? Does it prevent COVID also? Or it prevents?
So, COVID is a different antigen altogether. It's a different virus altogether. So COVID is a coronavirus. This is an orthomyxid family virus. So there are two different viruses. There is no cross linkage between the two, but definitely if you are able to prevent influenza virus, then you're also keeping your immunity high, and maybe that immunity results in a lesser burden of the disease, lesser morbidity, lesser mortality.
So it means if you are getting yourself vaccinated for influenza, so that will give you a less fertile breeding ground for COVID.
Absolutely.
And it will, if you are especially with comorbid condition, if you are elderly, then you should definitely go for vaccination. And this thing we are propagating amongst our industry, and that is right, sir. And like now we are getting this season for influenza, that is especially the November to February season, NH season. So what do you mean by NH season and SS season, in which we should be very particular about this influenza infection, and we should take all necessary precautions?
See, basically NH season, that is November to February, and then SS season, May to August, are all influenza seasonality and not any geographical locations. These are the two times when the viruses are predominantly present in India. The November is usually the NH season, as we call it, which is Northern Hemisphere season, and then SH is called the Southern Hemisphere season. They're just two different viruses which are prevailing in the country at two different times. And this has been seen across the country to be present.
Okay. So, sir, there are certain question answers from our Q&A box. Dr. Sudharma Dalvi, he has a question. If a person is vaccinated for influenza now, once the COVID-19 vaccine is available, can the person take it immediately?
So between any two vaccines, the recommendation is that you keep a gap of 2 to 4 weeks between any two vaccines. Okay. And if you have if you have vaccines acting by different modality, like if it is, one is live attenuated vaccine, one is a toxoid vaccine, one is a conjugated vaccine, then all of them can be taken together at shorter gap. But if it is similar mechanism of action, like if this is also a toxoid vaccine, the other is also a toxoid vaccine, then you should have a gap of at least 2 to 4 weeks between the two vaccines. Okay.
Then if the mode of action is same for the two vaccines, then there should be a gap of at least 2 to 4 weeks.
Yes.
So there can be any interaction between this influenza vaccine and the COVID-19 vaccine if it is available.
Yeah, sure. But anyway, I don't see the COVID vaccine coming in the next 2 or 3 months. So I think by then, if we have to vaccinate, then there's just the right time to vaccinate all the patients and all ourselves with the influenza vaccine.
Okay. So now the floor is open for the panelists. If they have any questions, then they can directly ask. Yeah, Dr. Gajan Kumar, sir.
First of all, I compliment Dr. Nangia for a very lucid presentation and making so many difficult things very clear to all of us. So my compliments to you, Dr. Nangia. Now my specific question is, see, the fear psychosis for influenza is low because there is specific antiviral medicines available and the infectivity is relatively low vis-a-vis COVID. My question is, if the advantage of influenza vaccination is there, overall advantage, then why it cannot be, do you recommend that it should be a part of universal immunization program as it is for other vaccine preventable diseases? What is your comment on this?
So that's a very, very good question, sir. So to answer that question, even though, see, basically, if you look at the universal immunization program, that is a UIP, that basically it's a government-based program that basically focuses on their priority diseases, which result in a high mortality and morbidity in children, and which diseases which leave long-term debilities and long-term morbidities, like polio, like tetanus, like diphtheria. But if you visit any pediatrician, if you have small children in the house, grandchildren in the house, I can assure you every pediatrician, at least who I know, would be vaccinating all his pediatric population, pediatric patients with the influenza vaccine at this time of the year. So they don't hesitate, irrespective of the fact it is there in the UIP or it is not there in the UIP. That is one. Second is that then it is recommended. So one is the children who are the high risk group. Second are the adults. You know, we as adult practitioners, I don't know, have some kind of a resistance towards these vaccines for some reason. I can't figure out why. I have addressed such platforms earlier also, and usually the question is that how can my patient afford 1,500 or an 1,800 rupee or 1,000 rupee vaccine? You know, we forget completely that if this patient was to get hospitalized or to lose his life because of a preventable disease, who takes the onus for it? You know, at the time of H1N1 pandemic that came in 2009, we've actually seen people dying. And even now, occasionally, yes, people do land up in mortality. I mean, I remember there was this young guy who came from a very good family, very rich family. And this was not in 2009, it was subsequently, 3 or 4 years later than that, who came in with an H1N1 influenza and landed up on ventilator, on ECMO, developed a fungal co-infection and finally died. Young guy, 25, 30 years. So again, the question is, if there is something that is preventable, why should you not prevent it? What holds you back from preventing it when it's a safe vaccine? Either the vaccine had major side effects then it was something different. Our government, due to limited resources, does not propagate or does not promote an adult immunization program as much, like in the Western countries they do. Probably because we are still a third world country, we do not have adequate resources. So our focus is not on preventing communicable diseases in the adults so far. But I'm sure that day is not far when the government will start working on that as well.
Right. Thank you.
So there is adult vaccination is definitely important. Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir, you have any?
Dr. Nangia, I would fully agree with your, the reason why Government of India is not able to, rather than Indian government may be willing, but if not able to initiate even the adult vaccination program because of the resource constraint, number one. Second constraint is that let's face the preponderance of deaths in India. We're still facing under 5 and neonatal mortality, which is a major challenge, which is tackleable by vaccination through the 10 vaccine preventable diseases. But more important, I believe, if the resources are available to employers, should they not apply these resources? So it's a workplace intervention for employee wellness, meaning the present cost of absenteeism due to influenza can be can be more than balanced by the investment in influenza vaccination. That could be one of the policies. So that means the employer organizations like CII, SOCHAM, FICCI should initiate the program for employer-driven immunization for influenza. What comments on this proposal?
No, excellent. I would agree with you. Basically, if you look at the cost-benefit ratio for the influenza vaccination program is almost to the tune of 4.2. That is 4 euros at the cost of 1 euro due to curtailed absenteeism, and also 23% reduction in the absence rate and 30% improvement in the lost working days. So that's a significant benefit. I mean, you can't ask for anything better than this, really. Hello.
I think Dr. Rajiv video is not working. So any other question from the panelists? Dr. Pingle, sir. Dr. Pingle is our past president, and he is also member of the International Commission on Occupational Health, and he's from Gandhinagar, Indian Institute of Public Health. Sir, Dr. Pingle, sir.
Dr. Nangia, excellent presentation, very crisp, very much to the point, and in a quick time. All the things that we needed, very focused. Thank you so much. Nowadays, we are getting a lot of studies and messages and forwards about steam inhalation. So what do you think is the importance and utility of steam inhalation, whether it is influenza or whether it is COVID?
So if you really ask me, I don't believe in neither steam nor in gargling or any other modality really. Ultimately, it's your own immune system which has to be enhanced to be able to fight any kind of an illness, in any kind of an infection, I would say, not illness. So if you actually see, and if you really look at it scientifically, then steam is hot air, and hot air is likely to rise. So if you take steam, it actually goes into your sinuses, yes, but it doesn't go into the lungs. If you're gargling, then even when you're gargling, then what? It's only a temporary phenomena for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I mean, you don't gargle for 10 minutes though, 2 minutes, 3 minutes probably. And then what? Then again, it's the normal milieu of that environment, the homeostasis that has to be achieved with the colonizing viruses and the invading viruses. So I don't think it has any role whatsoever to play.
Good, thanks for clarifying.
To add to this, Dr. Nangia, sir, normally what we have learned that this viruses, they are killed at temperature of 56 degrees centigrade, and the water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. And when the water boils, the steam which rises, the temperature of the molecules, it decreases. And by the time it reaches our nasal passage or lungs, the temperature further decreases, and which is ineffective for killing the virus. because if we are receiving this molecules, definitely burn our respiratory tract. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So steam is not a solution for killing the COVID virus. So that we have learned from our sources.
Steam and gargling would provide some symptomatic relief from the congestion.
Yeah. It has got some mucolytic effect.
Yeah.
So it washes off. Gargling and steam, it washes off your upper respiratory tract system because of mucolytic effects. That's all.
Steam just soothes your respiratory tract, and the gargles, they will reduce the viral load in your throat. So,
yes.
So thank you, Dr. Nangia sir, for this answer. And Dr. Pawan Gupta is our new secretary for Haryana branch. He has been elected unanimously for his founder secretary, Dr. Pawan Kumar Gupta. Yes, you can unmute yourself here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma, and a very good evening to you, Dr. Nangia. Such a pleasure to hear you. One of the latest and most lucid details shared by you by one of the key experts, I would say, on the subject matter globally. And maybe you would have treated the most number of patients for COVID in recent times. And I can say that because a couple of my known patients are also under supervision currently as I speak to you. And we are really privileged, and a couple of things definitely comes to my mind when we have been sharing all these details. That one take-home message for the attendants and for the family of COVID patients, because what happens, there is a communication break. The patient goes into the COVID ward, and then that kind of communication, which usually happens when a patient goes into the ward, one of the attendants is usually there. So there is a communication gap, a lot of gap comes in between, and then a lot of apprehension comes in mind. So from the perspective of family and from perspective of attendance, one take-home message from your side, if you can say for the COVID patients as of now in current situation.
Let's stay cool, and we are taking care of them. We're taking care of family members like we would of our own family members. That's all I can. Because the workload is so much that if the family has the expectation that we will talk to them twice a day or thrice a day, it isn't possible. It isn't practical for us to do that. Believe me, if you tell me your family member or relative who's on treatment right now, I would not even be able to place him like this. I have to open up my lists, which go into 10 pages to see which patient is where. It's almost like that. So yes, all I can say is that everybody should take precautions. This is a time where we have to not be callous, thinking that we are reached a plateau or that we've recovered from the peak. Well, we haven't. Nobody knows what the peak would look like. And now that in the northern part of the country, we're already having a lot of air pollution also. Yes. The situation is only going to worsen with time. We are looking at a very grim scenario ahead of us. All of us must wear a mask at all times, must keep a safe distance from everybody, even if it is known person. You don't know the infectivity rate is so high that if one person in the family gets it, it's the entire family which comes down. It's not like one individual. It's very rare. There are only a few households I've seen where there is only one person and the remaining 2 or 3 members are absolutely okay. Usually it is a call these days that we get, okay, doc, me, my brother, my sister, my father, my mother, except our domestic help, everybody else is infected.
Yes.
So, that is the kind of scenario that we're dealing with. And it's not just a simple viral illness that we're dealing with here. It is some kind of a complex virus which has thrombotic effects, which has long-term sequelae, lung damaging, resulting in lung fibrosis. The kind of fibrosis that you would see not rarely, but we've seen it with H1N1 also. But since the number of H1N1 patients were not so high ever, we would not have such so many patients coming up with similar problem. But here the burden is going to be huge. And what we're in for, we're not sure ourselves. So I'd like to wish you all a very good health and safe times ahead. So wear a mask, safe distance, and keep your hands clean. That's the only way you can save yourself, protect yourself and your family from COVID.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts once again and in a detailed manner, Dr. Nangia. The one last question from my side. It's like just negative, and then again after like a couple of days, symptoms are there, and then again it comes positive. So it's a very usual phenomena, or it's like rarest of the ones that you would be observing during this time?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. What is happening?
So RT-PCR test, the confirmatory test for COVID. So once at times it happens, it is negative. You test, maybe the patient is admitted, and then the couple of days you observe that maybe RT-PCR has to be repeated, and then the patient turns out to be a positive for RT-PCR. So is this a rare one usually happening, or it's quite it happens like quite normally that it happens? The RT-PCR tests are negative and then positive.
It would depend on various factors.
Okay.
RT-PCR negative in a patient, that means falsely negative in a patient would depend on various factors. That would include one, the stage of the disease. If somebody does it right on day 1 of fever, maybe it doesn't turn out to be positive.
Okay.
Second is how the sample has been collected, how it has been transported, how it has been processed. There are various factors involved. Whether it was a nasal sample, nasopharyngeal sample, throat sample, where was the sample taken from, whether it was deep enough. How in India, there are hardly any quality checks. So, the sample that they take, they put it up for RT-PCR, but have you ever seen any lab commenting on the adequacy of sample? Nobody does. There are very few labs which actually comment on the adequacy of sample, that this was adequate or inadequate. So RT-PCR being negative is not something uncommon. We've also had patients who have had a frank COVID-like disease, but their RT-PCR has been negative throughout. If you pick up the CT scan, it's classical of COVID illness, but RT-PCR is negative throughout. So what do? We still treat these patients like COVID illness and not just leave it to chance.
That's thank you so much for sharing about that. That clears a lot of doubts in mind. That definitely positive, negative, and then again positive. So this definitely will help. Thank you so much, Dr. Nangia. Over to Dr. Sandeep Sharma. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma.
Dr. Nangia, sir, one last question from you, sir. Like we are all working in different public sector undertakings and different corporates. So like I'm working with Indian Oil Corporation, and we are seeing day in, day out the patients of COVID and the influenza patient, they are also now on rise. So what is your advice? We should advise management to from association side, we had been advising for immunization of our workers. So will the immunization of all the workers or a select group of workers will help during this COVID pandemic at this particular stage?
Well, whether it helps in the COVID pandemic or not, but it will definitely reduce the burden on the healthcare system with the use of this vaccine if you're able to reduce the number of cases of at least the influenza virus. Co-infections, complications, comorbidities, more common in all this high-risk age group. So if it is not for all that you get your permission from, there are various ways that you can go about it. Probably do a co-share kind of a thing. 50% of the cost is borne by the employee, 50% by the employer. Or you could identify the high-risk group amongst all your employees. If the number of employees is too high, then people who have a comorbidity like diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, liver disease, kidney disease, immunocompromised, they could be taken as the role models. Like we do in our hospital, we identify the high-risk group in the hospital, especially those dealing with the ICU patients and the ER patients, and we get them vaccinated free of cost. At our cost, I mean at the cost of the hospital, we get them all vaccinated. So all nurses, GDAs, doctors posted in the ER and the ICUs would get vaccinated from the hospital side. So that is something that you could certainly do. Okay, so this will be a great key takeaway for all of us, that for the target group, we should identify the people who are vulnerable, and we should vaccinate them to reduce the healthcare burden on our respective organizations. And I would say that start vaccination from home. Vaccinate yourselves first. Vaccinate your children, parents, siblings. So believe me, every year there are almost 50 or 60 vaccines that I send over to all my friends and families as a gift from me in the beginning of October, September end. That this is like my responsibility towards you all. You've been all my friends and family members. I send them the vaccine at my cost every year.
So I think with this your presentation this year, Diwali gift should be this vaccine to our.
Absolutely, so it's really worth it. Believe me, it's worth it.
Quite right.
And I'm the first one to take it myself.
Okay, right.
So that will be a great gift to our family members and to our workers and the employees in our organization. So one last question from one of our participant. They say the treatment for COVID should be started within 48 hours of the onset of symptoms, though the COVID test is to be conducted only after 6th day. Is it correct, sir, or you have something to say about it?
So basically, we need to remember that there is no specific treatment for COVID. Like for H1N1, at least you have oseltamivir. Here you have favipiravir, remdesivir. There are two antiviral drugs which have shown some benefit. The only benefit they've shown is in reducing the number of days of illness and not shown to impact the outcome or the mortality. And this number of days of illness is reduced from 12 days to 7 days. So by 11 days to 8 days, something of that sort. So it's between 3 to 5 days that the reduction in illness has been, whether they use the antiviral or they did not use the antiviral. Now, the question is that you're absolutely right. In the first 48 hours, you can't even test. So as I said in the beginning, that if the index of suspicion is high, meaning that you know that he's been in contact with a COVID positive patient who's already under treatment and as now he himself has developed fever, then you are safe in starting the therapy empirically, presumptively, because the medicine favipiravir, which is available to us, or doxycycline ivermectin combination, they're pretty safe to use. There's no damage done to the patient. They don't have much side effects. So I would suggest, and this is what I also practice, I start the treatment right away if the clinical picture fits in. You know, somebody coming in with fever, malaise, loose motions, with loss of sense, loss of smell, loss of taste, I would not wait another day from starting them from treatment, irrespective of their COVID report. Even if it turns out to be negative, I would still treat them as a complete COVID case.
So any advantage of adding delta cortical?
Steroids.
Yeah, steroids in the initial stage.
So basically, this recovery trial has shown that addition of steroids has led to improvement in mortality. But when to add steroids, how much dosage is all very variable and will depend on the patient's clinical condition. What we believe is that first week of the illness is the viral phase. Second week of the illness is the inflammatory phase. So in the second week, most of the patients of mine would be on steroids along with an anticoagulant, a low molecular heparin, or one of the newer oral anticoagulants, in addition to all other regular medicines that we give.
Right, sir. So this was a great discussion with you, sir, and we'll keep on bothering you. And during this COVID times, we are all having new work norms for every one of us. And for your great talk and to felicitate you, sir, we have designed a small certificate which we shall be sharing with you on email, sir. So this will be a token of appreciation from Indian Association of Occupational Health.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sandeep and Dr. Giri. Really a pleasure to be here on the panel today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nangia, sir. And we'll keep on bothering you and with different queries and questions which will be raised by our people in Indian Oil Corporation and especially our IUH members. And we would love to have another session with you, sir, with a new topic, with new insight about this COVID treatment and prevention.
It will be a pleasure for me. Anytime we can plan that.
Right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for, and I thank all the participants also for joining and sparing your time for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.